Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Just give it another moment or so, and just see if anyone else is ready to join, and then we'll get underway. We've got a fair bit to cover today, so won't want to sort of start too late, but just give it another minute. Jolly good. Well, we've got quite a bit to cover today, so I think we'll get underway. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name's Simon Favarg, and I'm joined by Simon Davidson, obviously in different locations with everything that's going on, but hope he's waiting on the other end of the line. And today we're going to cover Sage 50 and really how you can get your data out from Sage 50 into Microsoft Excel. It's something we see loads of our customers have this requirement. Excel is great for using for management tools, reporting in general, and so on, management reporting packs. And so having that ability to connect your data directly to the Sage 50 database, not having to kind of manually download a trial balance and import it into Excel, is really kind of what we're going to cover today. But I'll let Simon Davidson cover that in more detail. If we just pop to the next slide, Simon, hoping you can hear me.
Yes.
Jolly good. So yeah, very quickly, we Experience Group, we drive business efficiencies through digital transformation. And next slide, please. And the way we do that is the four kind of key pillars within the business. So as so many of you will have maybe one or two products from us, and those might live in one or two or more of those pillars. But there's kind of four key areas to experience. ERP, which kind of covers very much sort of sits in what we're looking at today with Sage 50, CRM, cloud, and managed IT. And as I say, we drive those business efficiencies, and by creating the digital transformation from sort of linking these kind of key pillars together, be it hosting your Sage 50 in our data center in Enfield, integrating it to a CRM package such as Infor or Sage CRM or Act, for instance, or Dynamic CRM, managed IT as well, sort of supporting your on-site servers, your infrastructure, and so on. So it's really kind of leveraging the full business ecosystem to get economies of scale, to improve how data flows between your applications and so on. And that's really where we see our strength. We're not just here about kind of one application or one package. We try and sort of open up that conversation and explain how all these kind of systems are interconnected. But what I'll do now, if I'll hand over to Simon, who can pop to the next slide, have a quick look at the agenda. One thing to mention is that if you guys have any questions as we go through, what we'd like to do is cover those at the end. There's a question area on the meeting software. If you can just pop any questions in there, and we'll pick those up at the end of the session. And also, we are recording this, so we will send the recording out to you after the session as well. So obviously, got quite a lot to cover today, so there might be areas where it goes at a bit of a pace, but you'll have plenty of time to kind of revisit that from the recording that we'll send after the session. And I'll hand over to Simon.
Right, thank you very much, Simon. So yeah, as Simon mentioned, a fair bit to cover, but we'll go through step by step. And if you do have access to a PC in front of you, by all means, you can keep up with some of these steps we go through. So yeah, I'm looking forward to delivering this session to you. So sit back and enjoy, and let's move forward. Okay. I've got a demo system organized here. So this actually contains Sage 50. And I'm just going to make this full screen so we can actually see a little bit more what's going on. So let's minimize all that. And right, first of all, first point on the agenda. If you are wanting to get data out of Sage 50, there's a few things you got to set up first. Now, they're not onerous. It's not too technical. And once you've set those up, you can then link your data within Excel back to your live Sage 50 accounts. Now, the advantages that will give you, of course, is you'll have live refresh on demand access to your data from Sage 50. Now, from an analysis point of view, that's actually quite a powerful proposition. So let's talk about locating your data. Now, by locating your data, I mean where is the data file sitting in your Sage 50 system? And to find out where the data is, we need to load up Sage 50, which I'm sure most of you done previously. Now, when you start up Sage 50, it will present you normally with a list of companies. And one thing that you'll see, there is a data path column on the right-hand side of the screen. So next to demonstration data, which is obviously Sage's data, it's telling me that the data is actually sitting under a folder called demo data, which you can see the path, that's a Windows path name. It's sitting 2 or 3 levels down from the top level of C drive. So that is your data path. So you can grab a piece of paper, jot that down. It's going to be different for you, so don't take it from my system. And jot it down on paper because you'll need it for step number 2. So step number 2, how to change what we call the Sage 50 Odbc connection to the correct data path. Now, in English, how do you tell Excel where to get the data from? You've got to enter your right data path. That's the data path I've just shown you on the screen here. So just this part here. So how do we change it? Well, for a start, just go into your search box in Windows 10. Now, I understand that some versions of Windows 10 have had the odd bug or issue with the search box. So there is actually another way of getting to the Odbc connection details. But I'm going to show you this way first because this is actually working in my my system. And I will just simply search for Odbc. And the one in particular that I'm searching for is the Odbc data source 32-bit. Okay, now most of our clients, or most clients, tend to run what we call a 32-bit version of Office or Excel. So in the main, it's fairly safe to say that you should be going to the 32-bit data source connection. Okay, let's give it a go. So click on the 32-bit and it takes you to what we call the Odbc Data Source Administrator 32-bit. It's not the sort of thing you want to say too quickly in a hurry, but here we are. First thing you need to do is click on the tab that says System DSN. In here, now depending on the version of Sage 50 that you have installed, you'll see Sage 50 or Sage Line 50 V26. I've actually installed the latest version of 50, 32-bit, and the driver is the same. So what we're going to do now is double click on that, and it tells me that, yep, I'm editing the right one, and my data path is this. Now, going back to the startup screen that comes up when you launch Sage 50, we can see that in my system, it's actually pointing to the same location as the Sage 50 data files. A little point to make at this stage is you need to go as far as the ACC data folder. So while Sage 50 startup screen is saying the data path is in demo data, you actually have to specify the ACC data path part at the end. Okay, so this path name, which I've got in here, is actually correct for my instance of Sage. Okay, let's say I've actually edited that. I'm happy with contents, and I'm going to click on OK. So that's actually step number 2 done. So as you can see, it's actually not too difficult. So step number 3, we're actually going straight into Excel, and this is the part where we start getting data out of Sage 50. So you don't actually need to have Sage 50 open. So I've purposely closed down the startup screen, and I'm just going to launch Microsoft Excel, and I'm going into creating a new blank workbook. So let's maximize the screen. And point number 3 on the agenda, how to use the get data function in Excel. Okay. Along the top, we have our tabs within Excel, and we've got the tab that is named Data. In this tab, it contains various functions at the top, And the one in particular that we'll be focusing on today will be the get data from Microsoft query. So this section that you see on the left-hand side is what we call the get data area within Excel. So far, so good? Everyone's keeping up? Good. So what we're going to do now is actually look at the Sage 50 data structure. Now, to get to that point, I actually need to connect up to my Odbc connection. So let's go with that process. So click on from other data sources. Okay, move down from Microsoft Query. And on the screen, you've got 3 tabs. It says choose data source at the top. Now, the data source that we want to use is the Sage 50 Odbc that we had a look at in step number 2 earlier. So the name of it, as you probably remember, is called Sage Line 50 version 26. So I'm going to select that and click on OK. Now, it's come up with a dialog box. It says enter my user ID, and obviously my name's Simon, and my password for today's exercise is called demo, so it's fairly basic that I can understand and remember it. And I'm going to now click on OK. So these are the same user account or name and password that you used to log into Sage 50. So again, you're not using anything different, you're just using information that you already have. Okay, we're getting really on to number 4 now, introduction to the table structure within Sage 50. So let's have a look at the tables. So at the top left-hand corner where I'm moving my mouse, I can see a whole bunch of different names. I call them things, you can call them something. They are tables within the Sage 50 database. Now the Sage 50 table structure, it has very distinct tables of information around audit. So that's your audit history, that's your audit information, audit trail. We've got bank information, reconciliations. We've got categories, which are to do with stock items. Chart list, which is chart of accounts. We're not going to touch on CIS, and company details and so forth. So we've got actually a lot of information. Now the general rule is if you type something into Sage 50, whether it's a transaction or a master record like a customer or a supplier, or anything along those lines, if you're typing something in, it's going to be stored somewhere within Sage 50. Now, with reporting, and it doesn't matter whether we talk about Sage 50, Sage 200, Navision, it doesn't matter what system. When you're faced with a reporting exercise, the challenge that you always have is where is the data kept? So I'm not going to say that this process will be without frustration, because I think sometimes it is a bit frustrating to find data, but it's going to be there somewhere. And if it's to do with customers, it's most likely going to be under the customer information, under the sales accounts. So the key thing is familiarize yourself with this table structure. We can see there's a table for departments, fixed assets, invoices, invoice items, and invoice items, ironically, is actually not the stock items contained on an invoice, but the whole line of information, which includes the stock item, but includes description, unit, quantity, unit price, net, total, for example, includes all that information. Now, I'll show you the next thing you can do. Now, see where those little pluses are. See on the left-hand side here. Well, you can actually click on the little plus, and it opens up the list of all the fields of data that you can have or see, access under that table. So we can see invoice number. So that's your invoice number that is on your invoice that you send out to your customer. We can see the item number. We can see the job, if using the job cost functionality. We can see stock code, comments. Okay, there's comment line one, comment 1 and 2 on a line within the invoice, and all this other information, for example, like quantity, and unit price. A little tip for you is, if you are reporting out, just be conscious about whether you're reporting or displaying data in Excel about a foreign unit price or a net unit price. Because don't forget, if you're using Sage 50 and you've got the foreign trader add-on, you'll be conducting transactions in foreign currency. So a foreign unit price is actually the foreign currency amount, in this case, unit price. So just be conscious about the data that you're picking up. And by the way, if you're using the foreign unit price, then the unit price could be euros, it could be GBP, it could be Swiss francs. So it really is anything at all that you transact, including the base currency sterling. So that just gives you a bit of a heads up as to the table structure and some of the fields that you can see within Sage 50 data. Now I'm looking at the data from Sage 50, it's live. These are the tables contained and the fields I can access. And there's a lot of good stuff in there that you can actually report out on. And dare I say, it might get to the stage that reporting might have actually become fun for you. And it's sometimes a little bit addictive, because once you get on a roll, you'll go, yep, I can do this, and you'll move on and do other things and maybe more complex things. So, for example, net amount, we've got tax amount, obviously tax is VAT, and so forth. So you can see that there's a lot of tables in here. Normal ledgers to do with your normal accounts, project information, and purchase ledger. Purchase ledger, no surprise, will be your customer, having one of those moments, will be your supplier accounts that you've got set up in Sage 50. And down the bottom, towards the bottom, we've got the sales ledger. Those are the customer's accounts that you've got set up in Sage 50. So for the purposes of this little bit of training, I'm just going to pick on invoice items. So I'm just moving up using the arrow on the toolbar and popping back up to the top, and there's my invoice item. Now, moving to the right just a little bit, see the little arrow pointing to the right hand side? Well, because I'm now on the top level of that table, I just click on the little right arrow and Bob's your uncle. You've now got a list of all the fields in that table. And these are the fields that will appear within your Excel worksheet. That's pretty neat. Now, you can obviously take off things that you don't wish to use, and it might be that you don't need comment lines 1 and 2. And unfortunately, the control button on the keyboard doesn't work in this particular screen, so you have to do it one by one if you wish to get rid of these fields. So I'm going to left click on comment 2 and click on the little arrow to the left. That means I'm taking off that field, and I will not be showing that field in my list of data returned from into Excel. You can go through and repeat that exercise. I'll just do it once more just to ensure that you're familiar. If I don't want to see a discount rate, left click on that and then left arrow. So that's really good. I've now shown you the range of different tables. I've shown you the fields within a table just by clicking on the little plus mark to the left of the table name. And I've actually shown you how to remove a couple of fields that we don't want to see in our data. So the next step you need to do is actually click on next. And what I'm really doing is combining number 4 and number 5 on our training agenda, so because it flows in really well together. So click on next at the bottom, and on this tab here, I've got the option to filter the data that I want in my Excel workbook. Now, by filtering, I mean I can exclude certain things, and it might be that I exclude all the records that have been deleted. Now, tip number 2, if you are reporting out from any system, and Sage 50 is no different to a lot of systems, Sage 50 allows you to delete a transaction. Remember the old good old delete option? Well, delete actually marks the record in the Sage 50 database as deleted, but it doesn't actually physically remove it. So just a word of caution, if you are reporting out on things, it may pay to exclude deleted items. Now, this filter screen here is my opportunity to actually filter out and only include non-deleted transactions. In other words, transactions that I have not deleted. Now, knowing the data helps because one of the fields in here is record deleted. Now, you left click on the field you want to filter on, and you can say equals. And if you are filtering, you need to know what you are filtering on. I don't mean the field name, because I know I want to filter by record deleted, but I need to filter out on the data value that I want to include or exclude from this exercise. So it could be 0, it could be -1, and I recall Sage 50 actually I think uses -1 for deleted transactions. So if I only want to see active or live transactions that have not been deleted, therefore I would need to say equals 0. Next. The next screen is a sort order, and that sort of means basically how do you want to see the data, ascending to descending, what do you want to sort on. It could be by customer code, it could be by stock code, invoice number. It really depends on your unique reporting requirements. If you're designing a report or creating data into Excel for a colleague, ask them how do they want to see the data. Do they want to see it ordered in a particular way? And that will guide you as to what field you need to sort on. So I could actually do this by date. And it's just a case of finding the date field that you need. And let's have a look to see if I can find it. And it's just a case of going through there and finding the date field in particular. Now, I can't see it at the moment, so I'm actually going to use, let's just use stock code. Easy enough. And by the way, you can sort on a secondary level, on a third level. So if you want to sort by stock code and then by another method, then you can actually do that just by entering another sort. I'm going to click on next, and now I'm going to say return the data to Excel. What that will do is it will go away and basically say, right, where do you want to import the data to? I want to put it into a table, and I want to go into a table because I want to use the data myself for some other reason. Now, it may be that you're wanting to use this data returned to, for example, do a pivot table on the data, or you might want to run a lookup or a VLOOKUP or an index match, whatever takes your fancy. You may want to run that across the data that's returned in the table. So again, Excel is very, very flexible, and it really depends on what you're after. At this stage here, I'm just simply going to show you how to return the data to a table. So I'll leave the table ticked just at the top, and I want the data to go into A1. So that means it will go into the top left-hand corner, and click on OK. Now that was pretty quick, wasn't it? That was actually quite fast. Now I'm running this within the system within my laptop, so it still runs fairly quick. And this is getting the data back straight from Sage 50 itself. So, okay, what do we have? Well, we've got a whole number of different columns of data. We've got all the columns that we said we're going to return when we set up, when we looked at our data structure before, and we picked the different columns we wanted, and we removed a couple that we didn't actually need to see. So all the data is returned. And by the way, here's a field that we entered a filter on. We said we only wanted to see the records that are not deleted. Well, those records, as I said, have a value of 0, and that's what the filter is acting on. So, third tip is always make sure when you are designing a report, whether it's in Excel like I'm doing today, or it could be Sage 50 Report Designer, always be conscious about, is it returning the data that you expect to see? Don't just take the system's word. If you've said return everything, it's going to return everything. Now, that may not be exactly what you need to see or want to see. So use filtering to eliminate things you don't need to see. Okay, so that's all great. So we've got the data into Excel. So in a way, we've actually, well, we've covered pretty much number 7 already. We've actually achieved getting the data into Excel, and we can do stuff in Excel that we would normally do in a standard worksheet. Now, by that comment, I mean we can go to the top of the screen or a column, and we can filter on a code. And it might be that I want to see all the invoice lines, and this is the invoice line records that I'm returning. I want to see all the transactions, invoice items, lines that have a stock code BOD. There we go, board 1 and board 2. Done. So we can see there that the filters are very, very useful. They will help you slice and dice and present you with the data that you wish to see. And it will help you narrow down the search from potentially lots of records. There might be thousands, if not tens of thousands of records, and it will narrow it down for you into just a small subset of data. Now, this might be exactly the type of report that you want. Now, obviously, standard functionality in Excel, that's probably telling you to the obvious here, but you can remove your filters. You can go back to seeing all the data applicable. So this is data returned from Sage 50. It's live, and hypothetically, if this was a live system, maybe this was your system at work, you could actually go into the data menu at the top and just click anywhere on the data, just make sure it's activated. And you can actually go into refresh all, see the little arrow at the bottom, and you can say refresh. Now, the difference between refresh all and refresh is you may have multiple connections to your Sage 50 data within the same Excel workbook. So if speed becomes an issue, maybe you've got hundreds of thousands of transaction lines that you're trying to report out on, combine that with maybe 1 or 2 extra worksheets of other information, and you're saying, okay, well, this is taking just a little bit too long to refresh, then just refresh one sheet when you need to, and don't refresh all of them at once. So refresh is equivalent to, and if you just go back to that little menu, just do it again, refresh, done. Very quick in this case. Refresh all, obviously, does every connection, updates all the data back to your Excel sheet. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a flavor. This is actually good data. When I say good data, it's actually demo data, so it's not really that good after all, but it's actually, it gives you a good idea how to slice and dice its invoice line detail. So you're looking at possibly sales information, you're looking at maybe KPIs on sales, marketing information, stock details, what you've sold. Yeah, you got some really useful information if this was live data. So what else can we do with this? Okay, I've shown you the filters, that's pretty neat. And I've shown you how to refresh the data. And what else? Well, we can do a pivot. Now, pivots are one of those very much, what's the word for it? Underrated, maybe, underutilized. Pivots are actually quite neat, and they're relatively easy to use, but you just need to know how to drive them. And it's a form in a way of business intelligence. Pivots allow you to slice and dice your data. So maybe think about marketing information, sales information by product, sales by customer, account numbers, maybe analysis of balances. It really depends on what you want to achieve. Then pivot tables be quite useful to, or maybe quite useful to achieve what you want to achieve. Okay, well, let's actually have a look at a pivot. So the important thing is this data connection using the Odbc data connection to Sage 50, you need to leave this in this worksheet. Okay, so we're not going to overwrite what we have here. And in some ways, before I go further, I'll be tempted to rename this and go Excel data, maybe something along those lines, or source data, or something along those lines that tell you what this data is. Now, to be a little bit more informative, I should actually really call this invoice lines, shouldn't I? Okay, so invoice lines data. I'm just going to create a new worksheet, and I'm just going to call this my pivot analysis. Okay, done. So next step, what do I do next? So I want to include or set up a new pivot table. So I'm just going to walk you through this process. It's really straightforward, and just know how to, you need to know how to drive it. And what I'm going to do is create pivot. So insert pivot table. It's asking me for a data, a table range. And this is where I'm going to flick back to my invoice lines and basically highlight the data that I want to report out on. Now you notice how the table range has actually changed to table underscore query underscore from stage line 50 version 26. That's the name that Excel has automatically given this whole range. So whether this range grows because you get more transactions in the system and the added rows will drop down to the bottom of the list, it will grow, so it will actually expand over time. So by leaving it set to table underscore query, that's what we need. We need to let it dynamically increase over time. So that's really good. So I'm going to actually insert this under pivot analysis. That's the worksheet that I created before, and I'm going to click on OK. So at this stage, I've got a few more boxes on the screen. What do I do next? So right-hand side, we've got pivot tables. These are the fields that are contained in the table of data that I selected in step number 4, 5 on our agenda. And you see that we've got item codes, item number, description, and so forth. So with a pivot is a slice and dicing mechanism. It has 3 concepts. Actually 4 if you look at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, but 3 I want to explain right now. Firstly, it shows columns of data. So that's where the columns part comes into play at the bottom right-hand corner of my screen. Secondly, it shows rows of information. And that's the rows part. And it will show values. Now, the information you show on rows, under columns, and the types of values you show really depend on what you drag and drop into those fields or those panes. So let's show you. So I'm using this invoice line data, which is the line information, line records within an invoice. So this makes up effectively what you're charging your customer by way of invoice. So I want to see stock item code. So I want to see, and this is the important part with reporting, whether it's by Excel or whatever reason, is you need to know what your end point is. And by end pointers, I mean, what are you trying to achieve? What data do you want to see? What is the analysis you want to see? If you don't know where you're going, then I guarantee you're going to get there. Okay, it's one of those things, sayings, if you don't know where you go, any road will lead you there. So basically, I want to see in my pivot, I want to see a stock item code, and I want to see that as either vertically, horizontally on the page. In that case, I've stuck it in as a column. And this just gives you a bit of a heads up how you can actually show your pivot. And I actually changed my mind now. I actually want to show this as a row. So I want the stock codes to actually be rows of data. So I'm going to drag the stock code for my column area and drop it into my row area here. So straight away, I've got a list of stock codes. Good, that's a start. Doesn't look much, but I'll tell you what, that's a starting point, and you always got to start from somewhere. And what do I do next? Well, what type of columns, what columns do I want to show? Well, I want to see how many items I've sold to my customers. So I need a quantity field. I need something to do with quantity. Oh, I got one here, quantity. I'm going to drag that down from the field list and drop it into my quantity. And actually, that's not really what I wanted to do. I want to drag it to the values because I actually want to see instead, and this is going to show you what happens. I want to see instead the quantity I've sold next to each stock item. So basically you can see, and I've done on purpose here, you can see the quantity is a value. The value needs to appear in the value section of the pivot, and the columns of data, yeah, let's see. Now, what do I want to see as a column of data? I might be delivery date. I want to see the sales of stock items, quantity, by date. And I want the date to appear along the top. So what I could do there is take the delivery date and put it as a column. So actually it's done a few things, quite a few interesting things here. It's showing the dates at the top, and we can see that it's got a plus next to the dates, and you can drill into, just left click on the plus, and it expands out the columns for you, showing a little bit more information. Let's do that for 2008, just to give you another example. So I'm going to click on 2008 and just see what's been sold. Well, actually, I see I've sold 51 products called ENV001. That's interesting. I didn't realize I was selling them back then. 2017, you can see how the Sage demo data had a bit of a jump from 2008 to 2017, but that's fine. We'll go with the flow on this one. So click on 2017, the little plus, and I can actually drill down by quarter. Oh, I've sold 20 items in Q2, apparently in June, by the way. And I've sold 20 for the whole of 2017. So straight away, you can actually start seeing that this is actually quite a useful sales technique in analyzing what I've sold to by way of stock items over a date range. So that has hopefully given you a bit of a flavor as to what you can do with pivot tables. And I've simply just basically shown you columns. So here's the columns of data. So it's years, quarters, delivery date now. And because I've expanded those columns out to show that the drill down in the years, it's added the different things to the columns section here. Rows, I'm showing stock code as the rows. And the values, I'm showing quantity. Let's say I actually want to see the price or the value of my sales. Well, I need to be careful about what field I pick, because if I pick the unit price, that's really not going to do what I need to, will it? Because unit price is basically one item at £10. £10 is my unit price. Now that I really actually need something that's multiplied by quantity to give me what I want. So I need something like a full net amount. Oh, guess what? I've got one here. Full net amount. I'm going to drag that down here. So straight away, we can actually see I've now got a total here of what I've sold by way of quantity and a total net amount for each period that I've got showing at the top. And with pivots, they're great for flexibility because I can change my mind as often as I want to, and I change my mind relatively often. And you can do that by simply just going into your pivot selections and take away what you don't want to see. So select or left click on quantity, drag it back up to the top, and I've removed that quantity from my pivot. So now I'm showing just my full net amount. So that's just giving you a bit of a heads up. I've just clicked on the little down arrow next to my sum field here, and I can go into value field settings and change my name of my field. Okay, and now I've called it net sales. There we go, at the top. At any stage, I can go and refresh my pivot table. And that data, by the way, is only as up to date as my source data. So this data, unless I refresh my invoice lines, the pivot will still be reporting out on the same data. Now, because you'll be wanting to report out on your live Sage 50 system, you'll need to refresh that periodically. And that's just a simple case that I've shown you before, going into data and either refresh all or refresh. So data's now been updated, and I could actually now refresh. Okay, so that's my data now refreshed. Now I can change the formatting of certain fields or text, and just right click on the field and format cells. And you've got the same sort of formatting commands as you normally see, so I don't need to run through those. You get the idea. And that's how formatting of a pivot table is possible. Now, one thing I haven't shown you, I don't know if anyone spotted my omission or my exclusion or whatever you want to call it at this stage, but I haven't actually talked about filters. So I'm going to talk about that for the next few minutes, because unfortunately we're sort of reaching the end of our session this afternoon, which is a bit of a shame, but I think I've shown you the power of Excel reporting of Sage 50 data. I want to show you filters. Okay, so here's the filter area on the right-hand side of your pivot. Now, the data that this pivot is working on is this data from my invoice lines worksheet. You may have a need to limit the pivot reporting on a subsection of that data. So it might be a number of different products, it might be a department, it might be a delivery date. I don't know, it really depends. So in that case, what you can actually do is find the field that you want to filter on, and you can drag it down to this filter area down here. So if I wanted to filter based on, I don't know, what do you reckon? Let's do item stock code maybe. And that's actually taken away my row, so I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to take something along the lines of record deleted, possibly, yeah. Whether you choose to use record deleted as a filter is up to you, but it depends on whether you've excluded that from your original data. So remember how we set up the data source and we actually had a filter screen that we said we only wanted to see live transactions? Well, that means we don't actually need to filter out deleted transactions from my pivot, because they're not in my source data. So there's no point filtering by record deleted. But I could actually do it based on, department, perhaps department name, for example. So if I want to do a filter on that, drag it down to filters and see how it's added the department name at the top of the pivot table. Now from that, you can actually click on the down arrow, and you can actually then specify what filters you want to run your pivot on. And it's very much the same as filters on a column within Excel. So at this point, just looking through my agenda, we've covered how to...
questions have come through.
Yeah.
Are we okay to cover those now?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, by all means. I think we've covered everything we need to at this stage.
Jolly good. So first one is, how do we save and retrieve a query to use it again? So obviously you built that query. So how do we save?
Good point. So when you're setting up a connection, so let's just pop back into my invoice lines worksheet, and let's go to connections here. And there's my workbook connection. Now, properties, all I'm seeing here is the properties within this workbook. So what you need to do when you're setting the connection up for the very first time, if you want to reuse it, I think that's what the question was about, is do this. So new workbook, go into from other sources, go to from Microsoft Query, pick your data source, click on OK, put your credentials in, pick your data, and go obviously through those couple of selection screens. And what I would recommend you do is make sure you click on this button here, Save Query. That will basically allow you to give it a name. And you can see from here that I've already saved a query down the other day just as I was preparing for this session. that means you can actually come back and reuse that set criteria or query for other workbooks that you prepare. So hopefully I've answered that question for you.
Jolly good. And then the next question was, how do you bring data in from other tables or data sources? So obviously you pull through the invoice lines. How do you then link, say, invoice lines to another data source or other tables within the same data set?
Okay, so what you can do with that, and there's a couple of approaches. One is you can have a different worksheet set up in your workbook that you go through and you actually bring through data from another table. So that addresses the need for, and as long as it's a existing Sage 50 table, you can just bring it through to a different worksheet. Then it's a matter of basically doing VLOOKUPs or index matches, or I think there's actually a new lookup function that Excel's come out with, but it's just a case of looking up the data that you need between the two worksheets. The other option is, and it's a bit more complex, is that if you've got sort of like SQL skills or someone a bit techo within the organization, you can actually ask them to go and tweak their connection at almost like a SQL level or a command level. And I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So I've just clicked on connections at the top of the page, and I'm just going to click on properties, query from Sage Line 50 version 26. And on the definition tab, all the commands here, and I'm going to pull this out so we can actually see a little bit more. All the stuff here is basically all the fields that I've actually that I'm actually returning from Sage 50 table. Now, using this syntax or language, I could potentially bring back one data source with data from 2 or more tables, just by making sure I write the correct commands in this area. Unfortunately, that's outside of our time or scope for today, but that is actually very possible. But it's got a syntax and you need to follow it, otherwise it will throw up errors.
Does the edit query function as well down on the left there work? I think you can pull
those in. You can do that. And edit query, that's actually, I think it knows, thinks it's being edited by someone else at the moment. Let's just have a look.
If you go to invoice line sheet.
Yeah, let's go back to here and see if I can actually edit it from this point here. Yeah, switch back to Microsoft Query. So I need to go in a slightly different way, and that's going to be through what's going to be the best way of doing that? Probably property, no, not properties. Let me think.
That might be one for another session. It's a bit more.
There is a way of actually.
So
you can bring up a graphical thing.
Link queries together, so you can link the tables together. You just have to find the fields that link those tables together. So it's all done through query, and find like ID fields or common data fields that will tie the two sides together. But probably a bit more than we can cover in today's session.
Unfortunately, yeah, but it is possible, and it just depends on how much time you've got and whether it's from lots and lots of different tables, and it may be worthwhile joining them all up front and just having one data source coming through. Any other questions at all?
Nothing has come through on the chat panel. Anybody have any other questions they'd like to ask at this stage? Or nothing seems to be coming through. Well, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you all taking the time to chat with us today. Simon, if you can just pop back to the PowerPoint, if that's okay.
No problem at all.
And so we're running a few more sessions. So if there's anything else that you would be interested in, if you go to the web page there, it's our website and then webinars. But it's all, if you go to the web page, it's front and center on the main screen. We're running a few other webinars on Teams and Office 365, cloud and security. So please feel free to sign up for anything that's of interest. And as I say, what we'll do, we will send a feedback form out afterwards. It'd be fantastic if you could spare a couple of minutes just to fill that in. It's always great to get a bit of feedback on the sessions and how we can sort of shape these going forward. And also I'll get the video recording sent out to you to follow as well, which I have to get that downloaded from the system, but then we'll get it sent out to you on email as well. But yeah, thank you everybody for your time today. It's much appreciated. And any questions, any queries, just don't hesitate to drop myself or Simon an email, and we'll certainly come back to you. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much as well.